Welcome back. The Wiehahn Commission's first interim report was presented to Parliament on the 1st of May in 1979, after the Durban strikes of 1973 and the Soweto uprisings of 1976. The government established the Commission to investigate South Africa's industrial relations system. Now, the Commission recommended that the Labour Relations Act be revised to offer black trade unions legal legitimacy and encourage them to register. These reforms, according to the Wiehahn report, were necessary to restrict the expansion of black labour unions in the 1970s. Now, joining us now to discuss how far we have come since then and what gains we have lost is former Cabinet Minister, founding General Secretary of the Congress of South African Trade Unions, Naidoo. Jay, good morning to you. Such a pleasure to be in conversation with you this morning. So how far have we really come since that Wiehahn Commission and how things are currently unfolding within South Africa?
Well, good morning to you and good morning to your listeners. I mean, the history of trade unionism has a very long-term history in this country. Going back to the discovery of gold and diamonds and then the huge numbers of immigrants seeking the gold rush that came to this country and started off the first trade unions. And in fact, the first trade unions were incredibly reactionary because they were white workers coming from Europe and they were designed to protect the rights of white workers and in fact were the earliest forms of apartheid. But black trade unions actually had a long history as well. And, the ICU, the Industrial and Commercial Union, set up by Clemens Kadali in 1919, became a huge organization and actually made a number of breakthroughs before it was crushed. And again, the re-emergence of trade unionism aligned to the African National Congress, particularly when the Mandela generation with Sisulu took over the youth wing. We saw an explosion of trade unionism again linked to the ANC and the Communist Party, particularly around Moses Kotane and in the 1940s, again, the explosion of trade unions, but all without rights and all which were crushed. The great mine workers union was crushed in 1948, when the nationalists came to power. But trade unionism never died amongst black workers. The emergence of the South African Congress of Trade Unions in 1955, became again the type of platform on which black workers organized, albeit illegally. And then that was crushed with the banning of the ANC and the banning of political parties. But 1973 was for the working class a watershed because a spontaneous explosion of black anger against the exploitation of the racial capitalist system and the starvation wages and the denial of fundamental rights to workers resulted in a huge strike that spread across the country. And so from those, came the 1976 watershed of the explosion of students in the Soweto uprising and then across the country. And I think the system and any oppressive system will always seek to co-opt the sections of the society that they see as antagonistic to them or hostile to them. And yes, so what the Wiehahn Commission recommended came as a result of tremendous pressure by black workers themselves. And in the first iteration of this law, they sought to exclude migrant workers. So basically, in 1979, that law read that it will only be open to those with what we call Section 10 rights. I mean, a limited number of black people who had, 99-year leases to stay in white cities. And so when we entered into the fray, and I became a volunteer in the trade union movement in 1979, there was a huge debate in the trade union ranks about whether registration was co-option or registration was putting our foot in the door to push it open. And the trade union movement was quite split about this, the black trade union movement, the independent trade union movement. And so at that point, I was part of the FASATU, the Federation of South African Trade Unions. I was a volunteer, then an organizer, and then the General Secretary of the Food Union. And within the ranks of those unions, and including the National Union Mine Workers that had come up, the decision was made to register, but to fight for the right of all workers, including migrant workers, to be members of trade unions. And of course, they had other types of restrictions on us around, almost being subordinate to the white trade union movement, etc. And, qualified access to the collective bargaining system. But we fought all of that, and eventually we won. And so we won that right in the early 80s to be registered, to participate formally in the collective bargaining system, and to do it on our terms. There are unions that chose not to register, and those were main unions particularly that were more community-based. And eventually, when COSATU emerged, it became a federation in 1985 of unions on industrial sectors with a strong shop floor organization. And most of those unions became, and that's what led through collective bargaining, fighting for a living wage, etc., led to the establishment of the massive workers' movement that grew into COSATU.
All right. Former Cabinet Minister and founding General Secretary of the Congress of South African Trade Unions, Naidoo, thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thank you.